and thank you so much for attending tonight's very special lecture on biological anthropology. Tonight I will be focusing on a subject very near and dear to my heart, and that subject is Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis. Now, you've likely heard of Neanderthals, but I'd wager you are not entirely aware of their relevance to the genetic history of your own species, Homo sapiens sapiens. You'll notice right away that I refer to them as Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens sapiens. And that nomenclature indicates that while they are different subspecies, they are the exact same species. In practical terms, what this means is they could interbreed. Yes, make babies. And in fact, there is every genetic indication that they frequently did. But more on that later. Before I begin, I would like to introduce my two charming helpers for the evening. They have graciously volunteered their time to demonstrate for you the differences in shape and function of Neanderthal skulls and human skulls. First, I will introduce Nazki, our charming specimen of Homo sapiens sapiens, that is, anatomically modern humans. Nazki, thank you so much for volunteering your time tonight. I appreciate you. Next, I would like to introduce my dear friend, Eep. Eep is our example of Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis. Eep, I appreciate you. Thank you ever so much for educating us tonight. Now, I have a third assistant who has graciously agreed to be here this evening, but he is slightly different in the fact that he is still alive. He is a 34-year-old Homo sapiens sapiens called Skirvard, and he so happens to possess a fascinating mixture of anatomically modern human and Neanderthal traits. So he will allow us to examine comparative skull morphology in real time, an invaluable opportunity for us all. Now, as I discuss the differences between human and Neanderthal skulls, I want you to keep in mind that the similarities that unite the two subspecies are far more extensive and important than the differences that divide them. That said, let's get started. Now, if we look at our charming subjects, right away you'll see one of the defining characteristics of our subspecies. This large, round, globular brain case. Many people think that the size of the brain itself is what sets Homo sapiens sapiens apart, but actually that's not true. Neanderthals had, on average, even larger brains than we did. However, while their skulls were just as round and bubble-like as those of humans at birth, as they grew to adulthood, the Neanderthal skull became lower and sloping. This does not tell us anything at all about their intelligence in comparison to ours. For all we know, and much research seems to support this, they had intellectual capacity close or equal to ours. But they may have been smart in slightly different ways, of course. Now, I don't want to throw too much academic jargon at you, but there is one word I need to introduce, and that word is neotenic. A neotenic skull is one that looks very similar to that of a baby or a young child. As I mentioned before, humans and Neanderthal babies had similar-looking skulls, but the Neanderthal skulls changed as they grew by adding bone to different locations. Human skulls, by and large, do not do that. In fact, we tend to lose bone from different locations, resulting in a very flat and childlike face. This means that humans are more neotenic, but more on that later. Next, let's look at the back of the skull. This back part here is called the occipital bone, and it is shaped very differently in humans and Neanderthals. Neanderthals tended to have what's called an occipital bun. Basically what looked like a hair knot at the back of the skull. The amount of occipital bunning varies in human beings depending on each human's unique genetic traits, and sometimes on the amount of Neanderthal DNA that they carry in their genetic code. As I mentioned at the top, humans and Neanderthals almost certainly inbred extensively. This means that some humans are blessed with more Neanderthal-like traits than others, including occipital bunning. Here we move on to some more neotenic features. As I mentioned before, bone is lost from certain locations in the face during the teenage years of anatomically modern humans. The result is a flatter face from the nose downward. Again, this is what we see in babies, so it is neotenic. But in Neanderthals, bone was actually deposited on the face during the teenage years. As a result, the middle part of their face sticks out. This is called prognathism. In animals, you might call it snootiness. Neanderthals are more prognathic, while humans are more olfagnathic, straight up and down. Another part that sticks out on Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis is the brow. Like many earlier hominid ancestors, Australopithecines, Homo erectus, etc., Neanderthals have a notable brow ridge that most humans don't have, at least not nearly to the same extent. Anthropologists still are not sure what this brow ridge was for. Originally, it was theorized that the brow ridge strengthened the face to protect it from bite force. Neanderthals had a much more powerful bite than humans, so it seemed like maybe the brow ridge was preventing the face bones from breaking due to the force of that bite. But, actually, later research showed that brow ridges aren't needed for that. Also, loss of bone ridges in humans was not necessary to develop a bigger brain. Initially, scientists thought the brow ridge prevented the brain from expanding, but that is not the case. So maybe it was for nonverbal communication, maybe dominance signaling, or maybe it just happened and it was not enough of a disadvantage for evolution to get rid of it. A similar mystery is the human chin. Other hominids didn't have one, so the question becomes, what was it for? It wasn't for biting. Actually, the stress of biting is better dissipated without a chin. Perhaps that's why Neanderthals didn't have one. One theory is that as human beings became more reliant on social activity rather than physical combat, testosterone went down. As an unintended side effect, the human face got smaller, allowing the chin to stick out more. Nothing has been unequivocally proven on this front, however. If you look closely, you will also notice that Neanderthals have a much bigger nose hole than humans do. This is also somewhat mysterious. For a long time, scientists thought that the more spacious nose allowed Neanderthals to warm the air they breathed before taking it all the way into the body. The areas where they lived were very cold, after all. But actually, primate and Arctic animal studies have shown that sinuses get smaller in places where it's extremely cold, not bigger. So, despite living in freezing climates, Neanderthals do not appear to be cold adapted. This feature, too, remains open for discussion. In closing, I would like to address a question that has occurred to many people over the years, and that is, where did Neanderthals go? For a long time, many researchers believed that Neanderthals got killed off by humans because humans were just so much better and smarter than them. Over very long periods of time, however, human populations tend to do the opposite of exterminating each other. They tend to interbreed. This is a biological and evolutionary fact, and since humans and Neanderthals are similar enough to make babies, it's almost certain that they did so. But here's another interesting bit of evidence. It's quite possible that the gene for red hair came from Neanderthals. The red hair gene is found in Neanderthals from Paleolithic Europe and the Middle East. In fact, it's found in Neanderthals earlier than it is found in humans. There are some complications with this theory because the red hair mutation found in Neanderthals is different from that found in modern humans up till now. However, it's possible that it was a different red hair mutation that Neanderthals passed on to humans, and we just haven't sequenced any Neanderthals who have it yet. So, if you have red hair from your grandma, keep in mind that ultimately, over many hundreds of generations, it might actually come from a Neanderthal. In closing, I would like to examine our third volunteer. As I stated earlier, he is a 34-year-old specimen of anatomically modern human, and yet, despite that, he displays a fascinating combination of Homo sapiens sapiens and Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis traits. For example, as with Homo sapiens sapiens, he displays a high degree of neoteny, that is to say, his brain case is high, round, globular, and ball-like as it was when he was an infant. That did not change during puberty as it would have with Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis, and thus his brain case does not slope. Now, if we move a little bit further down the face, you'll see that it is relatively orthogonal in its orientation. It is flat, it is straight up and down, and this is because, contrary to Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis, where they would gain bone during adolescence, he actually lost bone, resulting in a very delicate, a very Homo sapiens sapiens type face. Now, if I feel the back of his head, I find no occipital bunning. His occipital bone is relatively smooth and does not stick out as it would in Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis. Thus, we can say that he does not possess that particular trait. The next thing I would like to examine would be the chin of this particular specimen. You'll notice that he has one, unlike Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis. What this means is that his face has remained small enough into adulthood for the chin to stick out. You'll notice it is very defined. However, his broad cheekbones are rather characteristic of Neanderthal. Next, I would like to take a look at his brow ridge. Unlike some Homo sapiens sapiens, this specimen has one, although it is a good deal smaller and more delicate than it would be in Neanderthal. Again, the use of this particular trait is still up for debate. It does not seem to confer any advantage when it comes to biting, so perhaps it was used in communication. Again, as I said, overall the face is comparatively delicate, with a protruding chin, a sharp jawline, and a small mouth and overall build. However, there is one trait that stands head and shoulders above the rest in this specimen in terms of its Neanderthalishness, if you like, and that is the broad nasal aperture. Now, when I say nasal aperture, what I mean is the hole in the skull that connects to the nose and leads to the sinuses. His is quite notably broad. Again, while scientists initially thought this was for warming air, this is not, as it turns out, a cold-adapted trait. Sinuses grow smaller in Arctic and other cold climates, not broader and larger. Now, a brief disclaimer. While I say these are Neanderthal-like traits without a DNA test, there is no way to be sure whether or not this specimen has Neanderthal ancestry, but I find it quite enjoyable to think about. Don't you?